everyone, and welcome to Vertical Living. We're in the middle of a series called Learning to Trust Again, and here's episode 3. You know, when I was in high school, I was in the marching band, and we spent a lot of time working on our turns, getting to a yard line or our designated point and turning to the right or to left or completely around. And what we did in that moment was we learned how to pivot. We learned how to plant our heel and turn, to shift our weight completely and go in a different direction. And that became something we drilled and worked on because our turns were critical. What you pivoted on was critical in knowing how to shift your weight and be able to continue your movement on in the next direction. This word pivot is going to be important for us today as we take on the next step in learning to trust again. It could be a difficult process when you've been burned, when you've been hurt in relationship, when you've been hurt in a set of circumstances, and you find it difficult to walk back out into life as you knew it or how it was. And that is true even for us today in the midst of a virus crisis. With so much information and so much anxiety and fear and concern, it can be difficult to walk back out into life and trust again. So for that reason, and for all the reasons that it applies in relationships in our life, we're looking at what it means to trust again. And we're following King David in the Old Testament, a man who, as he writes in Psalm 18, is looking back over his life, and he's looking at some significant moments where he learned to trust again, because he'd been through some moments where he had been burned. Some of the very people that he counted as friends and trusted people in his life became ones who turned against him, who hurt him, who pursued him, who tried to kill him. And David often found himself having to hide, run for his life, and he found himself on several different occasions hiding in a cave. He found himself inside a rock, and there God did something significant in his life. And there in the cave is where he learned to trust again, because the cave did not become a grave. It became something he walked out of that totally transformed him, and he learned to trust again. Last week we saw, we're looking at these 10 names listed there in Psalm 18. And last week we saw the first two where we saw David say, "I will love you, O Lord, my strength," Lord Jehovah and strength. And so we learned that the first step in learning to trust again is coming to God, the one who has always existed, the one who is the self-existent one, who is our place that we can run to and grab hold of. And in grabbing hold of him and trusting in him, we find our healing as we trust in him to be the one who loves us, who forgives us, who heals us. But today, we're looking at the two next names that David uses in this psalm. He's going to use 10 names in these first few verses, and each pair helps us know the next step to take in the process of rebuilding trust. So, in verse 2, he starts off there and he says, "The Lord is my rock and my fortress." These two names for God are names that David understood well, because he had been inside a rock and it had become his fortress. So the word here for rock that he uses in verse 2 is not a rock like you might think of, or you and I might think of when we pick it up out in the yard or we pick it up at a lake and we throw it and try to skip it across a pond. No, the word here for rock in verse 2 is a massive mountain, something that is huge, something that has size and presence to it, and it has within it even places that are cut out that you can enter into the rock. You find this same word used over in the book of Judges, where it says this: there was a rock that 3,000 men went up onto, where they went to speak to Samson. So If 3,000 men went up on it, it was a very large rock. In Judges chapter 20, there's another use of this word, and on that occasion, there were 600 men who hid inside the rock. So it gives us this picture of something massive, and it gives us this picture of something that has the ability to enter into. So when David says, "The Lord is my rock," he thinks in terms of this massive scale, this rock that has cavities to it that he can enter into for protection. And David knew that as he had been hunted in his life. But also uses the word fortress here. The Lord is my rock and my fortress. The word used here is a description of a stronghold, a place where you would go to prepare for battle, a place that you knew you were safe, but it was also a place that was a place you were making a plan to fight from, not just one in which you were hiding, but one that became a base of offense. So here David says, "The Lord is that to me," and David learned all of that while hiding in it. It's fascinating that while in the rock, he learned that the Lord was his rock. So David had experienced disappointment. He had experienced the pain of rejection, having the very ones that he trusted turn against him. And he had learned that it was dangerous to despise his situation and those around him, but instead to deepen his trust. And that happened for him all here in the cave. You see, the places where you have been hurt, the places where you've experienced the greatest disappointment, the places today that you find it most challenging to trust again are actually designed to be the place where you trust God the deepest. And this is where our word pivot comes into play. You see, when disappointments come our way, they are not to bring us to a dead end, but they are actually to bring us to a place of deepening our trust. Disappointments become the place where we pivot and turn to God. When we turn to Him and realize, I'm experiencing this disappointment because I have trusted in a person or a situation or even in myself. And this is my indicator that it's time to pivot from trusting there to now trusting in God alone. And this is what step 2 is for us, pivoting from our pain to trusting in God. So we were healed in verse 1. That's what we did. We took the step to cry out to Him for healing, but now we pivot. We no longer trust in people, circumstances, or ourselves, but we pivot and put all of our trust on God, all of our trust in Him. And that turns into some very tangible things for us because we all look for places where we find our acceptance, places where we know people will receive us for who we are, places that we look to for approval, and people we look to for approval. We want them to give us our sense of approval and stamp of validation and worth, and we even look to people for our sense of affection, that we belong and are valued. But in moments of disappointment, and they will happen, especially in those 3 areas, we'll look for acceptance in someone, approval in someone, even affection from someone. And when we're disappointed in those, it's the indicator it's time to pivot and turn to find those in God. And the beautiful good news is that they are all available there in Him. The picture of Jesus, of course, gives us all of that. He is the one who laid down His life for us so that we might find acceptance in Him, so that we might find approval in Him, and we might find affection in Him. And it is a process of pivoting from people, circumstances, and ourselves to the place where we now put all of our hope and trust in Him, and we find our acceptance there, our approval there, and our affection there. And so then when people let me down, I have already pivoted and I find my strength in Him, so I don't have to face as great a disappointment because I know where my anchor lies. I know where my hope is. I know where my trust is. So, step 2, pivot from those you have trusted and even your disappointments. Let them be the moment that you recognize it's time to pivot. It's time to turn. It's time to now lean into, put my weight into the one who knows me, loves me, has provided forgiveness for me, has redeemed me, has treasures for me, has love greater for me than I've ever experienced anywhere else, and to rest completely in that and move toward Him. I hope this helps you take the next step in the process of rebuilding trust. We won't find our security in our circumstances, people, events, or even ourselves, but we have full security in the God who is the Jehovah, the self-existent, always existing one. He is the one who loves us. So blessings to you as you lift Him up and now live Him out.